Hello everybody and welcome to today's video. I want to talk about Chrono Cross today, but this video won't be talking too much about the game itself. That's for the review on digitallydownloaded.net, the new look digitallydownloaded.net no less, but rather in this video I wanted to talk about the joy of playing a classic JRPG for the first time. See, I never had the chance to play Chrono Cross. That's not entirely my fault. Square never released the original PlayStation 1 title here in Australia, and so while I was a big fan of Chrono Trigger, and of course the Final Fantasy series, this particular title has for a very long time been in the I wish I could play it list. Now, I could have played it on my emulation consoles, yes, but one of the odd quirks about having those is that when you've got 50,000 or so games to choose between, you actually tend to go with your favorites over the unfamiliar, and for me that means that I have replayed Final Fantasy and all of the Final Fantasies really, and Chrono Trigger a couple of times on those consoles. I have never got around to booting up Chrono Cross. But that has all changed now. I have now played it because Square Enix has finally re-released Chrono Cross on a modern platform. And I've just got to say up front, wow, what an incredible game, what an absolute masterpiece this thing is. One of the questions that always gets asked when a retro video game is re-released is whether it holds up. I always find that to be a pretty silly question personally, since we don't ask whether the Mona Lisa holds up, or a Stanley Kubrick film holds up, or Tolkien's writing does. Great art is fundamentally timeless, so to ask that question of games implies that there's something less than art that goes into them. Anyhow, that is another discussion for another day. But to go back to the question, the silly and reductive question that it is, yes, Chrono Cross very, very much holds up. It remains an absolute masterpiece that everybody should play. And now I got to play it for the first time. There is, of course, a special quality to playing a game for the first time versus replaying something that you loved. One involves a heavy dose of nostalgia, while the other scenario does not. So when I replay Final Fantasy IV, which is one of the main games on my emulation console rotation and something that I regularly replay, I know what's coming up at every point in that game. I know the monsters that I'm about to face, the tactics the bosses will use. I have my favourite bits, such as the climb up the mountain for Cecil to become a paladin, and I have the least favourite bits, which is pretty much the moon. The end part of that game is not my favourite part of it. But whatever bit we're talking about, there is no surprise or joy of discovery there for me. That's not to say that I don't think it's worth replaying a game. Obviously, I don't. I don't think that at all. I do think it is very much worth replaying a game, but rather there's a new set of joys that come from replaying a game. Remembering the time and place that you're at when you played it for the first time, for example. It also becomes easier to analyze the game on a second or subsequent replay, especially once you have the context of the full story. So a great example of that is another game I regularly replay is Final Fantasy XII, and while the first time through it I just loved the adventure, combat and art, and of course Ash's legs and her miniskirt, on subsequent replays the socio-political commentary was something that I started to pay much more attention to and found so fascinating within the game. It was something that I obviously noticed the first time I played, but it was only on the kind of replays that I started to analyze it. That's a big part of the reason to replay a particularly good quality game. However, with Chrono Cross, I have been able to enjoy a vintage Square RPG for the very first time. I've been able to have that first play experience here in 2022. That's something that's quite in short supply for me these days. In fact, as far as I'm aware, it's actually the last time I'll have this experience, as I have at some point played every other Square Enix JRPG that is available in English. Now, as I say that in this recording, at some stage one will probably pop up that I've never heard of before, but as far as I'm aware, Chrono Cross is the last time that I'll be able to enjoy the unique tone of writing that Square Enix did back in those days for the first time, when an efficient number of words carried a lot of impact. It'll be the last time that I get to rename characters and then wonder if the character I just named after somebody important to me was going to get themselves stabbed and deaded, which happened the first time I played Final Fantasy VII. I was completely unaware of that key scene, So I had given Ares a name of somebody that was important to me, and it was pretty shocking. Remember that time you could name characters after yourself, your partner, and your friends? There's an emotional resonance there that was lost when voice acting basically mandated that characters stick to their developer given names. Once again, once you've already experienced that, you know what's coming up, so you can name your characters appropriately. But the first time that you play these games, you almost think that it was deliberate that you could rename the character without knowing what's going to happen to them, because the developers wanted you to put yourself and your people, your circle, in the game, and then kind of have that experience, that deep emotional connection to the characters that way. I'll also never have the joy of puzzling through an unfamiliar combat system, facing down unfamiliar blocky enemies, and seeing PlayStation 1 era Square Enix backgrounds for the first time. Nor will I have the joy of trying to figure out the secrets of the game and how to get various characters into my party, which is particularly relevant for Chrono Cross, for the first time. Nor will I be looking forward to learning just what the villain has in store for the entire universe at that big moment of revelation. These things were all new, or were all new to me the first time I played through Chrono Cross recently, and I will never have that experience again. But I am glad that Chrono Cross gets to be the last PlayStation 1 era JRPG that I play for the first time. It couldn't go out on a bigger high as far as my experiences in video games go, with more fascinating characters, beautiful aesthetics, and an interesting, rewarding combat system. Chrono Cross has all of that in spades. I am already planning a replay as soon as I can clear off some of my workload, because I did not get my favorite characters, or who I think will be my favorite characters, into my party on the first run through. And I'm also looking forward to starting the process of really analyzing this game. As everybody knows, Square Enix JRPGs do come with a heavy dose of philosophy and thought. And while it's all too fresh in my mind, to really be puzzling through at the moment, there's going to be a lot to dig into with this one. I mean, in my initial impressions, it's this mix of nihilism and parallel universes and timelines that is just going to be a wonderful thing to muse over. So in playing Chrono Cross for the first time, I also found myself reminded of just how far the JRPG genre has come, but also paradoxically how little this genre has evolved. When I play other games from other genres, shooters like Win Back or GoldenEye, sports titles like FIFA 98, which is a favourite of mine, or Cricket 99, or fighting games like Street Fighter 2 or Tekken, the leaps and bounds that the genre has made from then to 2022 makes a lot of these older games very difficult to play. Street Fighter, Win Back, and FIFA remain a very good time, but GoldenEye, Cricket, and Tekken have definitively been superseded by what has come since. That's not to say that they're not worth playing, because again, games holding up is not a thing you say when you respect them as art forms, but the developers of those games have certainly learned how to make those genres much more comfortable in the years since. JRPGs, however, are different. Take any turn-based JRPG today, we'll say Blue Reflection or Persona as examples, and they're not that different to Chrono Cross. The more modern games might be flashier and slightly more varied and complex, but the way that we play them and the way that they play hasn't really changed. That's 90% of the experience of Chrono Cross. For JRPGs in general, really. For the other 10%, there have been definite improvements from Chrono Cross to modern era JRPGs. Modern JRPGs are much better at helping you to understand where you need to go next without needing to refer back to a guide, which is particularly useful when you've taken a couple of days off and load the save up and then not quite sure where you're up to. And also, modern JRPGs have skills and other important pieces of information made more clear to you up front, as well as the effects that they'll have. However, on balance, the turn-based JRPG remains much the same it was back on the PlayStation 1 and even before that. For me, too, the perspective of playing one of these older games without the goggles of nostalgia on, that was the moment I really realized that this genre has been very stoic over the generations. They're bigger flashier and more narratively complex now, but and the characters, of course, look human. I mean, in general, the presentation of these things is obviously much better, but Square Enix ultimately is doing today what it did 30 years ago in very much the same way. Anyhow, that is enough for this video. The long and short of it is I do love Chrono Cross, and if you've never played it before, you are in for such a treat. Enjoy it, because there is a difference between playing an actual retro game for the first time and playing a modern game that was inspired by the classics. And in playing Chrono Cross, you'll see that difference in full. Do let me know your own thoughts in the comments. Check out my review on the new look digitallydownloaded.net. And please do hit that like and subscribe button if you like what we do. Finally, if you do want to support what we are doing here on the site, you can back us on Patreon. You can subscribe for as little as $1 a month. And in doing so, not only do you help us to make all these videos and written coverage, but you do get a 56-page monthly magazine, which is full of some real thinky stuff to do with Japanese games, art, and culture. Links to everything I've just mentioned in the description below. Thanks as always for tuning in, and we will see you at the next video.